I'm Matt Wilhelmy. I'm the owner of Strategic Voyages Business Consultants. I'm also the author of Taboo Business Questions, What's Haunting Every Entrepreneur's Growth. And I'm really excited about this episode number 2 with Kathy Guillory. She is a fractional chief marketing officer with Bell Bear Marketing, specializing in multi-location marketing. Kathy works with consumer-facing businesses with 3+ locations across animal health, pet services, retail banking, automotive, aesthetics practices, and many others. Kathy, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Matt. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so in our first episode, we got into some of your background. And so obviously you've been in this industry for a while. You've helped lots of multi-location business owners. That's how you've kind of built your brand around helping these folks. And so sometimes when we're helping clients, and I'm sure that some of there's other folks that are going to be watching this video that maybe can relate. Sometimes companies don't take all of our advice, right? They think they've got it under control, or they think it's going to go one way, and they're like, "Hey, I got it," and then they don't got it. And so in this episode, I love to talk to my guests about some cautionary tales. You told me that you've got a couple that kind of revolve around this idea of beginning with the end in mind. You said that there's kind of these 2 different perspectives. One is really kind of getting those tools in place to help them build for tomorrow. And then the other perspective is identifying and having really great due diligence on M&A deals, because I'm sure that if you go through an M&A process that's not your great fit and ideal fit, it is just a pain in the butt. And then somewhere in here, I'd like to talk a little bit about a cautionary tale. I tried to help a finance company go from almost like a local regional presence to a national presence. And so there were some different opportunities that we had there, and we'll get into that. But first and foremost, Kathy, again, thanks for joining me. But I'm curious, when you talk about beginning with the end in mind, how does that fit in with being a fractional marketing officer who helps multi-location businesses? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is a topic that I'm really excited about, actually. I've spent a lot of time inheriting some of these challenges, right, personally, in different marketing leadership roles and walking into them from a consulting perspective. So I think it's really, really important to define what that is exactly. When I come in, my focus is on the entire enterprise, right? It's the entire organization. In some cases, it's just one brand with multiple locations, and others, it's a business or an umbrella company that has multiple brands. And so what I often find is, certain decisions were made really, really early in the process. Like certain tools were purchased, certain CRM tools, for instance, or different marketing delivery tools. And we're now signed up for 3, 4, 5-year contracts. And these tools were really useful when we were at, 10, 12, 15 locations, but really no longer serve their purpose at 50+. And so a conversation I like to have early, obviously it depends on when I come into the organization, right, is really figuring out what their goals are, right? What are their corporate goals? Is the plan to grow by, 2x as far as locations go over the next year? And then are they looking to franchise, right? That's an entirely different model that I worked with as well, where you may want to make certain decisions about systems, tools, how you structure marketing delivery, right? How you automate some of these processes so that as you're adding new locations, it really becomes seamless, and it's not like you're reinventing the wheel every single time, because you're right, it can be very, very costly and inefficient to try to untangle yourself, from some of these longer term contracts, tools, even how you structure teams, right? You may have 2 or 3 people who can support 10, 12 locations, but then you get to 50. How do those same 2 or 3 people support them? Do you get an agency? Do you get contractors? How do you sustain that growth?
So Kathy, when you're talking about that type of growth, number one, when I put on my CFO hat, I get pretty excited because you should be making a lot more money, but you won't be if your operations aren't very scalable on the back end. And so what I hear you talking about isn't only from the marketing perspective. It's almost like having a playbook and having everybody say, okay, new location playbook, here it is. Here's what we do, right? Steps 1, 2, and 3, all the way through, maybe XYZ or whatever your playbook looks like. But really kind of having everybody on the same page is important from an operations perspective, from a cost saving perspective. But what you're talking about is when you're opening up these locations, having some of these forecasting ideas and these conversations well in advance, because I'm sure your advice kind of shifts, right? If you're, okay, well, we've got, 6 locations, we want to get to 8, that advice might be a little different than, well, we have 6 and we want to get to 40. I would imagine they're just different conversations. And so do you have any stories that kind of fit in with that maybe think about, how you were able to kind of do that with one of your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. A perfect example comes to mind. It's around this automation and really scaling for really setting up operations for growth, right? I call it scaling for growth. But basically, I partnered with this pet care brand. They had 12 locations, and they had 2 people, 2 dedicated employees working on marketing. And they had these 12 locations. They had a couple more they were looking to open in the next year, right? Potentially 2 or 3, and then there was some tentative talk of franchising down the road, right? So that set off a couple of little, not necessarily alarm bells, but like flags, right? Okay, franchises tend to grow much quicker, right? Because you can typically invest in multiple markets and get as many as like 10 popping up in the next year, right? So that's going to be very accelerated growth. So you want to make sure that growth can happen quickly and that you have a defined process for how to just pop them up, right? Kind of a plug and play in each market model. And then also for these 2 people who are spending a lot of their time, upwards of 15, 16 hours a week, supporting the individual marketing needs of all the current locations, right? So now they have 12. They're responding to emails. All of these requests came in via email, and it was something as simple as, I have a new store manager, I need business cards, to something more complex like, hey, we're we're partnering with a pet adoption center and we're having an event next Saturday. We need 200 flyers, right, and a banner for the lobby, right? And these are real examples. They would just get inundated with them. The requests were really hard to manage, and every single one was like a start from scratch, right? Here's a one-off, or I don't have enough information to do this, right? I need to go back and forth, and then there are delays. And so one of the very first things we did is I sat down with these 2 people and we looked through their inboxes and identified, what are the types of requests, right? And put them into these really broad buckets. And most of them, probably about 95%, fell into 3 categories. They were operational, right? So they were things like business cards, letterhead, right? Hours, like signage, right? They were really kind of, you needed to have these, right? Cost of doing business. And the other was evergreen. So these are things like, we always try to upsell boarding at a daycare facility, right? So lobby signs, things like that. They were those evergreen promotional items. And then they were promotion specific things. So things like, most of these pet care businesses would have events with an adoption center at some point, right, down the road. So we knew that they would do a holiday boarding special, right? So really mapping these particular promotions out and creating some templates for them. The good news is the team already had a lot of those templates because they'd done so many of those one-offs over the years that they, could just kind of pull on one. And they said, okay, this is our, partner template for a pet adoption event. We're going to load it into self-serve portal. We're going to make fields editable, right? Someone can drop in a logo of their partner. They can put in the date, the time, location, etc. And then they can click either download or print, and it would go through a centralized portal, right, where it would get billed to their respective location, which was really important from just a cost management perspective and seeing who was doing what. And then it would give the local teams some freedom, right? Some flexibility. We were essentially empowering them to go and develop their own marketing tools that were brand consistent and cohesive across all the different locations. It took us about 3 weeks to go in and load all the templates in. We had a very long, it was about a 90-minute training session with all the people in the field who were doing it. We walked a couple of them through, here's how you do it, start to finish. But ultimately they loved it, right? And then every time for the next couple of weeks, they got requests like, hey, I need a business card, or I need a flyer, or I need a whatever. We would direct them to the portal and offer to have like a quick 5-10 minute call with them to walk them through it. And by the end of the 3-month period, every single person in the field was using this in some capacity, right? Some were using it more than others because they were more engaged with the marketing, right? They just had more resources. They were out in the community more doing these partnerships, but every single one of them was using it at the very least for their operational needs. And it saved a ton of time. I mean, it got to the point where by the end of the 3-month period, the 2 marketing team members were spending less than an hour on just loading next month's promotions in, right? It was no longer, let's add the whole library of everything else. It was, let's just load in the things that are coming up.
That's an amazing story because, well, a lot of reasons. Number one, I loved to hear that there was job costing to the location. That makes me very
Mhm.
happy. But I think the other side of this that's really amazing is that you were able to launch this large scale kind of a change management initiative. We're really going to just like rethink how we're doing marketing and the process. And instead of just emailing, these poor women, these questions that would get, hundreds and hundreds of questions a day, like you mentioned, everything from business cards to signage. Now there's a central, probably ticketing system. There's a
Mhm.
central platform for everybody to kind of go to. And so that just sounds like a big win. Not every company rolls those out very effectively. And so I've actually been a part of a few of them where, they try to do something like that, but then people end up, one-offing. And then before you know it, everything's a one-off. And so that can be pretty annoying as well. But I'm happy to hear that this went successfully for you. That's a win for Kathy and your team. That's fantastic.
I've been a part of a few of those that don't go successfully either. I think it really takes commitment across the board from both local and the field, right? Okay, we're going to try this, we're going to make it work, and then we're going to improve it as it goes as well.
Yeah, well, speaking of things that didn't go so well, I wanted to pivot just quickly here to the story that I was alluding to with this finance company. And so the background is that I was brought in to really kind of help them with a go-to-market strategy. They were trying to go from a regionalized, kind of operation to more of a national feel. And they were underway with it, but they were running out of cash. And some of the things that were really interesting to me about this process wasn't that nobody knew what they were doing. I mean, they were turning over locations, they were buying them, and they were, rebranding them as they went. So that wasn't really a problem. But what they ran into was that they weren't delineating their costs the way that I think that they should have. And I don't know how many conversations you have with CFOs. I want to know about that in just a second. But what this company was doing is all of their location, rebranding, acquisition costs, whatever you want to call it for the marketing, was getting dumped into a generalized marketing bucket that was shared with the same bucket that was also for new client acquisition. And so, as somebody with a finance background, I'm looking at this set of financials, really kind of expecting to see costs more clearly laid out for startup, locations going to cost $5,000 or $20,000 or whatever it is to do this rebrand. They had no idea. They literally had no idea how much it cost them to rebrand one location. They had a general idea, but after we got into it and got into the nitty gritty, it was quite the nightmare. And so that leads me into my question here, Kathy, which is this. When you're talking and you're working with these organizations and you uncover something like that, because I'm sure you'd want to know what is the per location kind of branding cost instead of just like shooting in the dark. How closely are you working with the CFO on some of those deals, or do you guys not really talk to each other? How does that work?
Yeah, I always try to make friends with the CFO. I think marketers and CFOs should always try to have a good relationship because I
They
think
should.
marketing
I
is,
hope,
they
let's
should.
say that again. They absolutely should. They
Yeah,
can be friends,
they
right?
it can absolutely be friends because I think one of my concerns or one of my questions is, how does the CFO view marketing, right? Is it really just like a cost center, or is it an investment? Because I view it very much as an investment and growth. And so trying to really convey that value, right? And I think defining some of that delineation is incredibly important. In my experience, and I've led lots of rebrands, both at a single location, multiple locations, multiple brands at the same time. The cost can get out of hand because you're talking about big capital investments. In some cases, you're talking about like signage outside of a building that's upwards of $50,000-$60,000 multiplied by a number of locations. So you really do want to make sure that you're tracking it at the local level. Not necessarily that it comes out of their respective local budget, right? That's kind of a bigger conversation to have, right? If we're doing a national rebrand, maybe corporate pays for it, right? But you are still tracking the expenses at each location, so you can know what it ends up costing you in the long run. Otherwise, it's incredibly inefficient, and then you're still trying to get that data on the back end after it's just all in one bucket.
Yeah, I want to just go back just for a moment to your first comment about CMOs and CFOs being, on the same page. I would love to think of marketing as an investment. I think of it as a cost center if and only if I don't have any metrics around what it's actually generating. then I
Sure.
think we're just kind of wasting money, because I don't know if we're doing a good job at it or not. I don't know if,
Of course.
you know, 1 month being a $10,000 investment and another month being a $50,000 investment. Well, I know that it's unrealistic to think that the revenue is going to go up like the same month that the marketing goes up. But if I don't have any other indicators, I think you talked about, you know, kind of getting some of those figured out with your engagements. I want to know that too, because I want to track it with the CMO. Somebody should be tracking it, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think a lot of those goals they do need to be tied back to revenue, right? There, I said it, right? Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe in 6
Eventually, it
months,
should
right?
generate some revenue. Yeah, I agree.
Eventually, it should generate some revenue. But part of it is also talking about that timeline, right? A lot of CEOs, a lot of CFOs don't know that, you know, brand initiatives you typically won't see results for 18 to 24 months. Right, because it takes that long to be in market, right? To have a new brand in market and to actually start seeing the positive lift from that brand, right? So if you have that conversation up front, then the expectations are set. Hey, we're going to invest $50,000 per location right now, but we're also going to do some other activities that are going to get people in the door quicker, right? Here's what we're going to do simultaneously, right? Probably won't be that expensive. We'll get some short-term results, but the brand, the longer term brand initiative, you'll be able to see an actual balance sheet results 18 to 24 months out. And then we go from there, right? And then we track it in partnership with the more specific, right? I'm doing, you know, ad spend today to get people in the door today.
So, Kathy, I want to know, at the beginning of this episode, you and I had talked a little bit about kind of this two-headed thought process of beginning with the end in mind. And you did a great job in unpacking the first half of it, which was kind of the tools that need to be in place to be scalable. But then on the other side of it is really on that due diligence, you know, selection of M&A deals, making sure we're not getting into bad deals. I've certainly done a number of M&A due diligence projects, and they don't always go super smooth. But I think that, you know, part of my job is at least identifying the risk and presenting it. But I'm curious, you know, how your perspective of these M&A deals and some of the due diligence that goes into that fits into beginning with the end in mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a lot of experience with M&A deals. A lot. Like I said, when I was at my former employer, we onboarded 50 plus locations in a year and a half. So very rapid fire, right? Sometimes 10 to 12 a month, which is a lot for the team to integrate both operationally and on the marketing side. And the ones that went smoothly were a good fit from the beginning, right? You know, very recently I partnered with a marketing team at an organization, and they inherited 3 locations with varying degrees of marketing problems. You know, one was probably the easiest to fix, right? There were reputational issues from a previous owner, right? Some of the pets were not taken care of to the standard that this new company expected, right? That the market expected. And so that one was a little bit, I would say probably the easiest out of all 3 to get in front of, right? Make a very, very public showing of new ownership, right? Make sure the staff is fully trained. And then just make sure that you're maintaining those standards as you go, right? Reiterating at every point, hey, we know this wasn't the case, kind of acknowledge the problem, own it, and then move past it, and make sure that you are kind of turning it around, right? It'll take time, right? Again, you know, very likely that 12 to 18 months to really start seeing tangible results, but doable. The other was the specific location was in a very, very competitive market, right? The market was oversaturated. And so it was, you know, very high growth, very highly affluent area. It was in a suburb of Atlanta, and there were just 4 or 5 very big competitors within a 2 to 3 mile radius. And so this particular location was losing a lot of its competition to other providers across the street or down the street that were newer, that were either competing on price or service or availability or any number of those things. And that is a much bigger problem to solve. Right. You know, that's going to require a competitive analysis on price, right? On some of the service offerings. We ended up adding a different tier of services that were a little more holistic, right? So in addition to your standard vet care, they brought on a kind of homeopathic veterinarian who was able to offer like acupuncture and things like that as a differentiator. But again, not a quick one and done solution. It required a lot more work and a lot more investment. And then the third, perhaps the most frustrating, was it was an acquisition that essentially became kind of acquiring a de novo, right? In terms of, it was a brand new location that had been in business for less than a year, and it did not have a customer base. So the resources that it would take to get that up to the level, right, up to the performance level that was expected, were going to be, 3 times what we expected from a marketing perspective. You didn't inherit a client list. You didn't inherit a list of people who already knew and loved you. Now you had to go build that from scratch, which takes longer and it's a lot more expensive. Doable, but there's a very different strategy in kind of acquiring an established, right, location, an established brand, than going in and building one from the ground up. The investment's very different and the timeline's very different. So those are just kind of 3 examples of what happens if maybe you don't do the right due diligence beforehand.
Yeah, I appreciate the extra level of clarity there, because when I'm working with leaders of organizations that are considering growth through acquisition, one of the questions that I often ask is why? What are you hoping to get out of it? And why is this location, or why is this your strategy, or what's kind of what are we going to evaluate success based on? It's some of those outcome-based questions, but when we really get into it and I start to understand why they're wanting to do it, then I'm able to say, hey, this one lines up with that why, or maybe it does not. If you wanted to purchase this location, like you were talking about, that didn't have this huge client base because it's relatively new, well, hey, if that's what you want, then great, this is it. But if you're expecting it to be, Massage Envy that's been there for 30 years, that is way different. It's totally different. And so you really have to kind of understand, what you're getting into, because then the next question is, do you have enough cash in the bank? Do you have enough risk tolerance? Are you patient enough? All of these types of things that, quite honestly, a lot of business owners aren't. They want the results fast. And I don't blame them. But, if you're going to go into an acquisition thinking that it's going to be something it isn't, no one's going to win that. Everyone's just going to be frustrated. So I really appreciate you bringing up those different examples. I think that goes to show, not only your ability to handle some of these large scale initiatives, but also that you've got the ear of some of these leaders when you're working with them. Good for you.
Thank you.
Kathy, I'm wondering here as we're wrapping up episode 2, if you've got any other sort of cautionary tales. It's okay if you don't, but I'm just kind of thinking to myself, it sounds like you've done tons of M&A work. You just mentioned one company, did some astronomical amount. I think you said 50, rebrands and location purchases in a year and a half. I mean, holy cow, it hurts my head just to think about the Gantt chart there. But what was maybe like the least successful? You don't have to like give the name of the company, obviously, but like when you're thinking about maybe a company who tried to do something like that and it just kind of didn't work, does any of them come to mind?
Yeah, I would say the last example I mentioned, right, where they purchased an existing location, fully expecting it to be a fully functional, right, location. So they were expecting it to be to have the staff like fully trained and vetted and everybody ready to go, and an active client base, which turned out to not be there, and to have revenue coming in, which it was, but it wasn't quite up to the standard that they were expecting. And so they essentially bought. They thought they had a self-sustaining acquisition, but they got a de novo. And so we had to very quickly shift gears and make sure that we were helping them grow from that lens, right? It wasn't impossible, it was just going to take a lot longer. Like I said, we did end up increasing the marketing budget for that location for the first year to support it, to make sure that we did end up getting it up to the same performance level that we're expecting. Not catastrophic, but certainly a lesson learned, right?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully whoever was doing the due diligence there, has a better process now. I would think that there needs to be maybe some more questions asked, more specifically around the forecasted financials. It's I think it's Kevin O'Leary who famously said he's never seen a projection he doesn't like. And so, when I'm thinking about the projections that I'm putting together, I do often have a very critical eye. It's very it's not very common to just automatically grow 10% year over year. It's very arbitrary, and a lot of people do that with their forecasted projections. It's just not realistic. And so you do want to kind of go into these opportunities with almost like a best case scenario, medium case scenario, and then worst case scenario, just to kind of have the scope of what could happen. I think probably would have gone a long way with that acquisition conversation. Well, great. Kathy, Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I absolutely agree. Anytime I see a growth number with 10%, anything double digits or more, I'm like, okay, what are we doing differently, right? What are we, is there extra budget? Is there extra, is there a new market, right? Is there a new product? Like what, because it's not easy to grow by 10% consistently year over year, unless you're doing something new and there's something exciting to grow with. So I'm with you.
Yeah. That brings me back to, a long time ago, I was working with an organization that's all they did was forecasted financials. And I kept asking why are we talking about this growth? How is it going to grow? And I remember the finance guys just looking at me like I'm nuts. They're just like, well, but 10%, it's like, 10% is not an answer to why. And so anyway, it's just kind of funny that people have different perspectives on that. But yeah, I think investors typically have a pretty cautious eye on some of these things. They'd want to know why. If there is something new, great. Tell me what it is. I'm not upset. I just want to know. I want to know what I'm getting into. So anyway, Kathy, thank you so much for spending some time with me on Cautionary Tales. I'm looking forward to our next episode, episode 3, where you and I are going to talk about some solutions to the case study that we originally brought up in episode 1. And I hope everybody stays tuned. Thanks.